Good afternoon, LSR7. My name is Katie Bergen, and I am on the PR team here in the school district. Today, we are recording our second episode of our currently unnamed podcast at the beautiful studios at the Summit Technology Academy on the Missouri Innovation Campus, and I have some special guests with me today. To my right is LSR7's lead elementary counselor and Richardson Elementary School counselor, Casey Blakemore. Hello, welcome.
Hi.
And to my left is LSR7 educational therapist, Kristin Scharlau. Welcome to the Unnamed podcast, my friends.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So for our audience at home, I had the pleasure of working with Mr. Blakemore and Ms. Scharlau this summer when we collaborated on some videos and content around social emotional learning. And that really kind of informed what I wanted to talk about today. And so that really is about how we navigate challenges in a year that has truly been unprecedented and unanticipated, and it comes with a lot of pressure and a lot of change. So I'm hoping today we can talk about navigating challenges when it comes to academics. And I'm also hoping we can talk about self-care, what that actually means, and what are strategies for self-care we can use during this time. And finally, I also want to talk about asking for help. So if you're struggling during this school semester, whether you're a student or a staff member, what do we have in LSR7 at our disposal where we can seek out support? So in any normal year, you are supporting students and parents through academic and physical and emotional challenges and meeting their needs in those areas. But we also know that, as we all know, this has not been an ordinary year, and we have this pandemic that's impacting our school environment in so many different ways. So as we get to a place where we talk about strategies and resources, let's first talk about what challenges are you seeing students facing, particularly with this year when so many things are different?
I think just simply thinking about the fact that we have all those changes, I don't know if you all feel it even as adults. I think our students, our children feel it just as much, if not more, in different ways sometimes. But when we have all those changes, and sometimes, there's, kind of in a couple different pots. One might be just the changes that are naturally occurring because of the pandemic, like wearing masks and other things that can increase stress, combined with, changes in schooling and thinking about which model, students might be in, as they're kind of figuring out, am I going to be online? Am I going to go back in person? Am I hybrid now? Those changes can increase stress. And on top of that, how all those things are impacting, their families and the stress that they're observing in their house and how that might or might not be handled in the best ways. So as all that stress, compounds, we see symptoms increase. As we feel like we have fewer and fewer options in life, we see symptoms grow and grow and grow. And so we see more students, personally, I've seen more students who are struggling with anxiety, more students who lack motivation, more students, especially with, when they're online learning, just because we're social creatures and we are engaged and motivated by connecting with others often. And so to be lacking that in a lot of ways that are really tangible and enjoyable, to be honest, then it's just harder for people to feel energized to learn, energized to connect, and feel like they kind of have a clear path and an end goal for either when we'll be through the struggle of the pandemic or kind of a clear path for the school year. So more stress, more anxiety, kids just kind of struggling with motivation for sure.
Are you seeing similar things, particularly at the high school level?
I'm definitely seeing similar things as Casey, especially at the high school level. I feel like students, depression too, missing out on some milestones, whether it be like, oh, this is the start of my senior year, and this is what I'm having to deal with. A lot of times too, grades, especially at the secondary level, I think kids feel a lot of pressure about grades and how that could affect post-secondary, and just the pressure that they're feeling from their parents, and just that kind of procrastination cycle of getting in a hole, feeling overwhelmed, not being able to dig out of that hole, so then just kind of shutting down emotionally and socially. And just parents feeling frustrated and overwhelmed and not knowing how to motivate their students. So that, especially secondary level, I see students feeling very overwhelmed and just kind of stopping, like just not logging onto their computers, not engaging in their Google Meets for class. just really like, I'm glad that we have hybrid because I think that's helped a little bit, that students at least can get 2 days at a secondary level to kind of be in person. But I have noticed that the online is a little bit less structured, so students are engaged those 2 days, but then they've kind of fallen off on days that they're not in person. So that's been a big struggle.
So let's talk a little bit about if you are a student or you are a parent who has recognized clearly that your student is struggling with engagement in any learning model, but particularly our learning models that include virtual learning, where a lot of your responsibilities have to be self-paced or self-guided. What would either of you recommend as the first step, the first thing you should do to take ownership of that and seek some support?
I think validating where they are and just acknowledging, like we would all want, like this is hard. Nobody was ready for this, and to be able to begin with connection and validation and empathy from that place, I think then, that child or that student, that teenager is able to feel like, oh, okay, I'm not alone. Because it's so easy for us to feel isolated and alone because of, the fact that we are more isolated and alone from the pandemic, but also when we're struggling, we feel like we're the only one who's struggling in that way. And that's particularly true with teenagers. So beginning with empathy and validation, and then letting them know, like, we're going to walk through this together, maybe sitting down with them and thinking through, maybe they need some kind of hand-holding support of looking at their schedule, thinking about, when their assignments are due. Being in school comes with a lot of responsibility, but doing that, more independently on your own at home, virtually, increases that. There's more things that they need to learn. There's more things that they might be juggling, times to log into this app or things to do on this app, assignments more independently without those reminders of being present in a classroom from day to day or being around their peers who might say, hey, did you finish this assignment? So there's more pressure on them just naturally from the different learning models. So I think showing empathy, validating, helping them kind of practically have some things that they can do, like looking at their schedule, and kind of maybe breaking down some of those things that they need to do so that they can, get those taken care of.
What are some other strategies that students could use for time management specifically?
Time management, a lot of times students need to look at their schedule and look at making maybe a visual when they are at home. If they are more successful at school, maybe kind of mimicking a schedule that could be kind of similar at home as far as waking up at a similar time, blocking off this time for first hour, this time for second hour, this time for third hour. A lot of times when I meet with students, I will review what work they are missing and look at what have the most points and work on those assignments first because it's kind of the bigger bang for your buck. And so they can see themselves getting out of that hole a little bit quicker and they are seeing their grade change. And like Casey said, partnering with either a parent or a school staff that you trust on, hey, I don't know how to make a schedule, or I don't know how to organize, whether it's their counselor, interventionist, even administrator or a teacher, reach out to somebody and say, I'm really struggling with how to navigate this. Could I maybe meet with somebody on a Google Meet and just kind of figure out how to set up my day when I'm at home, because staff would be more than willing to help with that if it's going to relieve some stress and have just different ideas. My main thing too, especially with younger students, is chunking your day, but also adding in breaks at maybe working for 30 minutes and then taking like a 10 to 15 minute break, a movement break, going outside or doing something enjoyable to kind of like recharge until you can keep going. So I think that's important too, because a lot of kids think they just have to sit down and just do it for hours, just do work. And you can take breaks, but just making them very scheduled. If you have to set a timer, once the timer goes off, you need to get back, on your computer. Something like that could be helpful.
Yeah, I think that really made me think about, Kristin, about chunking their day and really thinking about, they have to spend so much time on their screens already that maybe there'd be almost a menu of options of, these are some great break options for you when you are, maybe done with instruction or you finish this part of your work, so that there's some options other than just kind of being engaged in another screen, because they're going to be on a screen again for more instruction later that day, perhaps. So I think that's fantastic, thinking about not just that visual schedule, but like what are are some of those like clear options that you can have? And as a parent, maybe laying out some of those so that you kind of are controlling, maybe some healthy options for your child.
And I think it's parents might not feel so overwhelmed if they help, their kid create a visual schedule. That's an area that parents could help with. And then also, especially for younger kids too, which older kids can do, is looking at an assignment and say, hey, I'm going to get to problem 15, and then at problem 15, I'm going to take a break. So that way kids kind of know what the expectation is, and it's not this unlimited, especially if kids can't tell time or something, okay, you're going to do this for 30 minutes, that could feel very overwhelming. But if they know, you have to read 4 pages and then you can have a break, I think can be helpful, more concrete for kids to wrap their head around.
Break is a good segue, because I do want to talk about some of the things or some of the strategies students could use during a break from a self-care perspective, and the things that you can do to just focus on yourself and what you need as we're kind of in this uncertain environment. And that could apply to students, and I think it could apply to adults as well. I think self-care for me is one of those things that can be defined in so many ways, and sometimes the media tries to define it for you. How would you guys define self-care? And when you talk about self-care with students or staff, how do you describe it and break it down for them?
I feel like self-care is anything that re-energizes your spirit, that it doesn't always even have to have purpose. It's just something that is it's filling up your cup a little bit. So then you can be there for other people and your duties. So that's kind of how I define it. And I think a lot of times people think of self-care and they just think, oh, take a walk, do this, do that. It's the action of, but sometimes reflecting on what you're getting from it is important too. But obviously, most people know taking a walk, exercising, journaling, talking to somebody, all those things are self-care. But you can even think outside of the box on things that you enjoy doing that other people might not do, that you get rewarded from. And that's why I try to tell the kids that I work with, and I do share some of my coping skills because they're a little different sometimes, but they don't always have to be so cookie cutter. Lately, I've been really into roller skating, so I've been doing that and listening to music. Awesome. And the motion helps me a lot. I get active, but I really like to listen to music to process my thoughts. So I shared that with this student, and he's been skateboarding lately outside and listening to music, and he said that's really helped him. I think sometimes kids mixing motion with processing can help, whether that be swinging, swimming, doing something that's like movement, rhythmic. Can kind of help with processing and stuff like that. But just even thinking outside of the box, and a lot of times kids are like, oh, I didn't know that was a coping skill, so letting kids know that they're already doing things that meet their needs, but it just might not be from the standard list that people kind of think of.
Yeah, so similar to Kristin, I think of it as anything that gives you life, something that energizes you. It might just be a specific part of your identity. Maybe it's like a specific thing you like to do that would be like roller skating. When you mentioned filling your cup, it reminded me, I have a friend who likes to talk about like her love cup, her adventure cup, she'll kind of segment it. Mm-hmm. And really, it's just those 2 cups, I guess. I don't know. Maybe she has other cups, but she hasn't told me about them. But her love cup, she'll be like, we'll all hang out as friends. And she'll be like, oh, you guys are filling my love cup. And so I think, kind of like you said, Kristin, doing those things that give life, but also that reflection piece. You're thinking about, she's reflecting on that in that moment, thinking, not just that she's doing it, but, this is giving me life. And I think that's really important because, for our brains, they're so prone to attach to the negative, and that's kind of a survival mechanism. But when we're really consciously choosing to hold on to those positive things for longer periods of time, then it really does help kind of affect our thinking and our mood. There's a study that talked about forcing yourself to smile, which sounds kind of weird and robotic and strained, but doing that, just making that action, active choice, can help trick your brain into feeling happier. So the hard part about picking those self-care tools and coping mechanisms sometimes is that sometimes we don't feel like doing it, and sometimes we do it and it doesn't feel like it's working, and that's what we hear from students a lot. I tried this, Mr. Blakemore, and it's not working. And so we have to kind of keep thinking about okay, what other tools can you have in your toolbox? If somebody is coming over to work on maybe your broken refrigerator, they're not going to come with just one tool. They're going to come with 5 to 20 tools. So let's expand your toolbox. Let's think about all these things. And so we can kind of we often think about that with coping tools, but that's the exact same thought process we can have for self-care. what are all those self-care tools and activities that you have? So we might be thinking about like deep breathing activities, mindfulness activities, and all the great apps that there are for those. Just simply getting out in nature, doing nothing for a little bit, interacting with people. Hopefully, maybe there's people within their circle that their family is allowing them to engage with that they can really enjoy and have fun and laugh. Activities, kind of like roller skating, like you mentioned. Anything that's going to really help reset their body is probably going to have more bang for the buck. So that's like really good physical activity or really hard laughter, things that really kind of help you truly like feel that stress relief.
Is that a message that you have with your colleagues or that you and your colleagues are having? And especially with this backdrop of a time where I feel like adults are maybe sacrificing self-care because we are trying so hard to meet the needs of students. Do you guys have conversations about self-care with your colleagues?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes, maybe not as often as we all should.
Yeah, I think staff and colleagues, they know kind of what they need to do, but like you said, they're focused on either their kids and their kids struggling or their situation. So it does definitely take a back burner. I usually just remind students and staff, like, keep trying. Like, if one thing doesn't work, it's not going to hurt you to do something for yourself. But if it doesn't work or if you don't feel connected to it, try something else and just keep trying. Even just setting aside 15 minutes every day and making yourself do it. I mean, you make yourself get up, brush your teeth to go to work. Making it mandatory that you try to do something, maybe in 5 minutes, start out little and try something new every single day until you kind of find that niche. Or like, oh man, I really like doing mindfulness on Monday because that sets the tone for my week. And by Wednesday, I really need to be active. So I want to do something active. And the more you try things, the more your body, your spirit will tell you kind of what's working and what's not. But I think staff are really struggling right now, to be honest with you, especially staff with students that are in school. And I feel like they're feeling overwhelmed and stuff like that. And I know some people have talked to me about stuff. And I think just allowing people to vent and to validate that they are dealing with a really hard situation right now. And sometimes they just need somebody to talk to, or just that they're having a bad day. And they don't need me to fix it for them. They just want somebody to listen. So that's kind of what I've seen a lot, is staff just needing to get stuff off their chest.
Yeah, I think that's been the number one thing that I've noticed as well, is that just an increased need for people to be with other people. And that might be, checking in on, a teacher or a reading specialist or whoever it may be, just asking how they are and really, trying to bring yourself to a place where you can be present with them. I think that's true for parents and children, obviously, and for any other relationship. Thinking about staff and how we can support them. One thing that I try to keep in mind sometimes is being intentional about, mentioning the things that I'm doing, just saying, or mentioning the weather, like coming in here today and thinking like, oh my gosh, it's just so beautiful out today. Sometimes just that alone can help direct somebody else's mind towards that too. You're kind of, all of a sudden you're on the same page and you're both talking about that. Oh, what are you going to do this evening? And so you can kind of like casually direct a conversation towards that. Either something more positive or maybe something specific that is, self-care related. But we don't do it enough.
Yeah. What are things that maybe students or parents have done for either of you, or maybe of stories with your colleagues that made you feel supported or made moving through this, what we know is a hard experience, a little easier, gave you something that you needed in that moment?
I think sometimes just acknowledging parents, that's my biggest thing, is parents that they're struggling, their kids are really struggling, but saying after a meeting, I really appreciate you. I know that you guys, you're doing the best you can. You're trying hard. Because there are a lot of parents that are upset with what's happening right now. Even though I don't think they blame us personally, you get that feeling of just they're not happy. And just having parents acknowledge that, we matter, our job matters, they can see that we're really trying to be there for their kid. I think that's been awesome for me, because it validates me and why I get up every day and come to work, because I really do care about students and their mental well-being. And for parents to know that and appreciate that, I think that kind of re-energizes me quite a bit.
all the things that they would have done before, but maybe just do it more often. So some of those things that I think I noticed that our PTA is often very intentional about those things, and that might be providing a meal. That might be, last spring for Teacher Appreciation, they put together little videos of students and parents who had volunteered just to kind of say thank you to staff and that they appreciate it, and they put it together, I think, through Google Slides. So using different tools that we have to be able to connect, whether that's, different online tools that Google provides or like Flipgrid, different things that we can show appreciation in video even if we're not together in person. We did an activity in our building in a staff meeting about a week or two ago where we were just talking about things that we're noticing about each other. So everybody had a page, throughout this room, and my name was on one page, and everybody else's name was on each page. And so we just had a pen, and we'd go around and we would just write one thing that we noticed about that person. And so each person got like 4 to 5 comments of something that someone else noticed. And I just kind of quickly glanced at it when I got my page in my mailbox the next day, and I didn't think that much about it, but it's just sitting on my table, my workspace, and every once in a while I just look at it again. And so I think those little notes and kind of things like that just help energize us and help kind of shift our brains to the positive when we're struggling.
Well, let's talk a little bit about struggling and really what we should do and what students should do when they're really struggling to cope. It's gotten to a point where they've reached a point where they feel stalled, or they maybe feel really emotionally strained and are having a need for coping strategies. When you sense a student is at that point in the road, what do you recommend to them in terms of reaching out for support or help?
So I kind of think of it in a couple layers. I think about how do we meet their immediate needs in that moment, and I think it is a lot of the things that we've talked about already when it comes to about being present with people, being there so that they have somebody to listen to them, so they have that connection and they feel like even though they have these big feelings or these struggles, that it's okay. There's somebody on their side to help them get through that. Sometimes it's helping them have some proper perspective about that, thinking about like the size of the problem, think about what they control, like what's in their circle of control and what's outside of their circle of control. Sometimes it's helping them maybe have a little bit of hope. Sometimes I use a number line with kids, and like a 1 to 100 number line, and I'll have highlighted 5 to 18, like the typical K-12 school age years. And we'll talk about, right now this is really tough. And we'll talk about, let's say they're 7 years old, and so we're looking at that 1 to 100 number line, and this pandemic is happening while you're 7. And so we use that all the years before and all the years after to think about all the other great things that have happened in life and what might come next that we don't even know that could be amazing. And so kind of those little tools that we use to help them, kind of reframe their thinking and think about other things that might help them, get through this storm. Little words or phrases that we use like tough times don't last, tough people last. Things like that. Storms make trees take deeper roots. Things that can seem shallow, but sometimes they can be really meaningful, and those are the things that can stick with us at times. So that's kind of some of the things we might do in a session, little pieces of that. But then we also might talk about tools that can kind of help them maintain and kind of get through, if another storm comes up. Things that they can do when they're outside of our office. So things to help them in that moment when they're with us, and then things that they can take with them. Some of the coping tools that we've talked about. Also thinking about their support system, who are the people that they can reach out to when they're struggling, when they reach that breaking point. So what are the tools that help them come down from that breaking point? Who are the people that help support them, that they can connect with, that they trust?
Yeah, and if this situation, becomes pretty severe, if the student's suicidal or, danger to self or others, obviously we would hope that the student would reach out. A lot of my students that I have on my caseload, I try to be as available as possible. So a lot of them will send me a Google Hangout even. I'm feeling really stressed out. I need an extra session or whatever. I try to assess for safety. We're all trained in, to do suicide prevention and safety plans and stuff like that. So a lot of times too, even if a student isn't at that point, I'll do a safety plan just so they have something at their fingertips if they're like, their brain might be very overwhelmed and that be very upset, but there are some practical things that they can look at on their safety plan, phone numbers to call as far as like the suicide prevention hotline. They can either call or text, which I know a lot of students feel better with texting or chatting on the computer, so they could talk to a person that way. Reaching out to a counselor, a trusted teacher, a trusted adult if you're not feeling well, to try to get the help that you need. Is very important because right now it is so heightened as far as stress and, you might be feeling good one day, but then you don't have school for the next 4 or 5 days. And, so just trying to check in with kids pretty regularly because we're not seeing them 5 days a week, and making sure they have some safety nets built in place and numbers that they know if they're feeling overwhelmed, who to call, and when, and then like Casey said in session, just working on some of those coping skills, self-reflection, kind of knowing where you're at and before it gets to that point, reaching out and getting some of the help and resources that you need before it's really immediate.
Yeah, I think that made me think of triggers, thinking about what are those triggers that might get you to that point or back up to your breaking point. And I think that self-reflection piece is really wise. And then you mentioned too, like we do a lot of follow-up. We do, if that were to begin a student's referral to us, or maybe, it's escalated at least, then, we are scheduling times where we're following up with him or her. Scheduling that is a little different now with hybrid model. So we're thinking about what that looks like and being creative, whether that's through Google Meet or actually in person. And then, if we need to do another risk assessment or if we need to update a safety plan, but really trying to put, help them feel like they're supported, but also empower them so that they have the tools, because we're not always with them.
And same thing with parents. If your kid's really struggling at home and you don't know what to do and you're feeling overwhelmed, the school is here to support. So even just calling and contacting that student's counselor, and then the counselor can get the educational therapist involved if we need to, but we can get people involved, or even if they call a teacher, the teacher will kind of know how to get the right people involved. But just telling people at the school, and we can kind of help work with the family and, bring in community resources if a student needs a referral. So that way parents don't feel so alone. I think that's kind of been a theme that I've heard too, is parents do feel very alone, like, oh, well, now I'm a parent and I'm a teacher and I'm this and I'm that, and we are still here, 5 days a week. So, reach out if things aren't going well at home, or if you are seeing behavior that's concerning. And, we might not see your kid 5 days a week, but we can definitely help bridge the gap and give you some suggestions to do at home. I don't want students and parents to feel really alone during this time, and sometimes reaching out and getting a team behind you is very important.
Yeah. I think it's really important that we communicate that to parents. Like, we're on your team. We're here to support you no matter what you need. And being, welcoming to that, and so that they know, like, oh, this person really means that I can reach out to Ms. Scharlau or whoever it may be. When you're thinking about, like, how do we encourage students to support other students, the hard part is, like, often in, like, 5th grade, they start getting really good at wanting to protect each other and keep each other's secrets. So we have to use language like, it's not tattling, this is, your friend being a good friend. This is how we show that we care for somebody else.
We know that our staff are so quick to make time for our parents, take the time to chat with them and address any concerns in any arena, whether it's emotional concerns, concerns about academics. What resources or places do you guide them to, maybe outside of the school district? Great resources or a database of strategies. Are there places that you direct parents to when they need resources for supporting their children?
Yeah, we have a LSR 7 community resource guide. It's on the website, and it's coupled with a form that parents can fill out, teachers can fill out, counselors can fill out, whoever needs to refer a student or a family for needs. And it's got, a plethora of options on there as far as like housing, clothing, food, mental health stuff. And so we have the resource guide attached to that has 30-some pages of resources here in Lee Summit and in the Kansas City area to help with different things. And then the form that parents can fill out goes directly to us, and whatever kid's school that is, we follow up directly with whoever filled out the form, contact the family to see what they need to follow up with that. So I think that's kind of a streamlined way that if parents don't know really what they need, but just need somebody to call them, that could be a good way. Just fill out the form, put your number on there, and then somebody will call to follow up and see what you need.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic resource that therapists and counselors use a lot. Sometimes it's as simple as, with an email or a phone call, including that parent in what I'm working with that child. So maybe talking through like some of the coping tools that we use together and that we practiced, maybe, how we used scaling to help them kind of understand the size of the problem and what's going on. So kind of inviting them into that session a little bit, hopefully without breaking confidence so the child still, has that sense of trust. But so that the parent and myself are really able to operate like a team. So it's not just me having that conversation with the child with that language, but the parent has the same language. And then similarly sharing that with the teacher. So then we're kind of wrapping around with all of that language so that the child's hearing the same thing from multiple people. Multiple people are able to practice that with him or her. Thankfully, in the age of technology, there are so many great things just at the touch of our fingers that we could search for. Common Sense Media has a lot of great resources about helping parents set up kind of a balanced schedule and a balanced approach to online learning. There's a lot of great stuff from the American School Counselor Association and the National Association of School Psychologists. There's lots of great resources out there to help us, think through, the coping side of how to help children cope with difficulties, or specifically the pandemic, but also how to balance and cope with and hopefully thrive in the online learning environment and just kind of changing the learning models that we're going through.
We're getting close to our time here. I want to bring it full circle as we prepare to end the podcast. As sort of a recap, I want each of you to tell me one tip you can support students during this time, and one way or strategy or recommendation you would have for supporting staff during this time.
Well, I think blanket for both of them would just be to listen. I think students and staff both are just wanting to be heard, whether that be what's working or what's not working, and to be open to hearing both things and taking it in and really validating how they feel instead of just, saying, well, this is the way it is, move on. So I think that would be blanket for both of them, but specifically students, I think normalizing what they're experiencing a little bit, because it is so weird as adults, but we can kind of rationalize it a little bit more. And for kids, this is a big thing, a big interruption. So kind of normalizing this, it's normal to be sad. It's normal to feel depressed. It's normal to struggle with change. So normalizing some of their feelings, but then also acknowledging missing a school dance might be really hard. As an adult, might not be that big of a deal, but to a kid, that is a really big deal. So acknowledging what they're missing, but then normalizing how they're feeling. I think that would be a big thing. And for staff or adults, encouraging them to do self-care, I think, even though that's probably a really annoying answer.
But I think that's part of it, right? As adults, we should probably work on being less annoyed by that suggestion, because it is important. And when we aren't doing things like that, I think they can have big consequences.
Exactly. I just would know how, if somebody told me that, I would just be like, whatever. Yeah. But, it is true. Reminding staff and giving staff permission to take some time for themselves or take a day off, or, normalize putting yourself first, not always other people first or your job first, and not feeling pressured I have to be here today because this, and this. If you really need the day off, or if you need to take some time for yourself, have the grace and give the grace and be supportive of staff for that, taking time for themselves.
Yeah, I think time is key. I think time and grace, because like you, we hear, oh, you need to do self-care, do self-care, do self-care, but it's never coupled with and here's 2 hours to do it. You know?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And so, like, we have to give ourselves that permission. We have to give our children that permission and help them carve out, you know, these are the times where we're going to be working, and these are the times where we're going to rest, and kind of follow that pattern of nature. And we're seeing it right now. Fall is coming, the leaves are falling. You know, you just kind of let the land lay and rest, and then we'll have a growing season again. And so I think this is a good time to remind all of ourselves of that is, you know, the land is about to rest. We need to rest. That's something that we all need. It's a natural part of the life cycle. But in today's busy technology, you know, enhanced life, we don't see that. You know, we're so zoned into, I've got my email on my phone, I'm checking all these things. And you know, I know we're nodding our heads and we're almost kind of obsessed with all of that. And so I think we have to get to a point where, and maybe the pandemic kind of forces us to see that like it's not healthy. Like we need that time where we're shutting things off and where we're letting our bodies and our brains rest. And our children need that because either, you know, it might seem like they're resting more, but if they're always on a screen, like if they're always watching TV in the evenings or playing games or whatever it may be, instead of like really engaging with people or laughing or reading or playing outside, then they're not really able to reset as well. And so time and grace for ourselves, for staff, for children, and I think just really being able to empathize with them and say, I'm here with you. You know, I know this doesn't feel good. We're going to get through it together. I know that's kind of a trite saying right now, but it's just so true. Like to be able to look around and think like, okay, we're going to walk through this together. It is hard. It will have an end point. And after that, things are going to be so much better. This storm will not last. So I think, yeah.
I've been thinking, really, ever since that you mentioned roller skating or rollerblading. I have a pair of rollerblades that have been sitting in the corner of my garage for probably 10 years. And this whole time while we've been talking, I'm like, I should take those out. I should go for a spin. It's something I used to do all the time when I was younger. So I think I've learned something from this podcast. And I wanted to thank you guys for taking the time to chat about this really important topic that we know impacts our whole school community at this time. And really any year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
We'll have to have you
thank
back.
you.
Yep.
Okay, LSR7, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully by the next time we talk to you, we will have a name for this podcast. But in the meantime, we appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time.